One last bite, one last breath. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me your city. I value your voices. Wolfe begins his Halloween investigation. If you'd told me that the month of October would start with Nero Wolfe agreeing to meet a baker, I'd have suggested you go easy on the nutmeg. The man can't boil water without calling it an invasion of his sanctum, and yet there we were. Me in the front room of the old brownstone on West 35th Street, fielding a call from a voice that sounded like whipped cream over panic. Her name was Lydia Dane, proprietor of Dane's Seasonal Delights, a bakery somewhere in the village that, by her account, had become an institution. I've learned that anyone who calls their own place an institution is either lying or in the process of collapsing. She wanted to speak to Mr. Wolfe about a matter of utmost discretion. When I suggested that discretion cost $75 just to get through the door, she didn't flinch. That got my attention. I hung up and went to deliver the message to His Majesty in the plant rooms upstairs. The orchids were getting their daily oration, and I had to wait for a pause in his soliloquy to the Miltonias. When it came, I delivered the pitch in a tone that implied I knew what was coming next. "A baker," he said, eyes narrowing. "Archie, must we continue to admit practitioners of culinary bastardization to our sphere?" "She's not here yet," I said. "But she's on her way, and she's paying. Also, she used the phrase, utmost discretion, which usually means trouble with icing on top." He grunted. "Fa, trouble does not appeal. Payment, perhaps. You may inform her that I am occupied until 11. If she insists, she may wait in the office. Do not permit her to touch anything." That was about as welcoming as a moat, but I took it as permission. At 10:55 sharp, Lydia Dane arrived. She was mid-30s, dressed in a crisp houndstooth coat, and carried the faint aroma of cinnamon and tension. Her eyes darted like a nervous cat's, taking in the books, the globe, the serenity that Wolfe radiated even in silence. When Wolfe finally entered, having presumably secured peace among the orchids, she rose halfway, then froze, unsure whether she should curtsy, bow, or confess. Wolfe's bulk settled into the red leather chair like a reluctant deity returning to a lesser realm. "You are Lydia Dane," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Mr. Wolfe, I own Dane's Seasonal Delights, yes. I do not partake in pumpkin, nor its caricatures." "Proceed." She blinked. "Then perhaps you'll forgive the irony that my problem begins with one." I sat back, notebook in hand, because I could tell we were off to the races. She told it in bursts, like she was afraid the words might crumble if spoken too fast. 3 nights ago, she'd closed the bakery at 9. When she returned the next morning, one of her signature creations, a handcrafted pumpkin reverie pie, had been tampered with. Not stolen. Tampered. Someone had cut a clean wedge from its center and replaced it with a look-alike slice, same crust, same custard, but, according to her, different texture. I'd heard weirder, but not much. "It wasn't about the pie itself," she said, twisting her gloves. "It was what was inside it, a token, a small wooden charm that was meant to go to a particular client. Now it's gone." Wolfe's brows rose. "A charm? You conceal trinkets in food." Barbaric. "It was for a special commission. The charm was part of a marriage proposal. A man paid me well to bake it into the pie and deliver it privately. But now, he's vanished. And yesterday, someone broke into my kitchen office. Nothing was taken, but someone left an envelope. No name, no note. Just a sliver of dried pumpkin and a scent of my own spice blend." She looked from Wolfe to me, then back. "I don't know what's happening, but I feel watched. I want to hire you to find out who's behind this before my reputation and maybe my bakery crumbles." Wolfe stared at her, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded. I knew the look. He was already 3 steps ahead, building invisible scaffolding. "You are either the victim of a crude jest," he said, "or a pawn in an enterprise more complex than your profession merits. Archie, get the details, addresses, times, names, the client who commissioned this confection, and any recent, disgruntlements among her staff." "Disgruntlements," I repeated. "Got it." Wolfe closed his eyes. "And Miss Dane, should you have brought one of these pies, kindly remove it from my premises when you leave. I will not have my home smell of false autumn." Her mouth opened, shut, and opened again. Then, "You'll take the case?" Wolfe's eyes snapped open. "I will consider it. I dislike interference in my house, but I dislike enigmas more. Leave your card. Mr. Goodwin will contact you after lunch." She stood, shook my hand with trembling fingers, and departed in a gust of perfume and pastry anxiety. When the door closed, Wolfe turned his gaze on me. "Archie, the world is relentless in its pursuit of nonsense." "True," I said. "But nonsense with a fee attached smells sweeter." He grunted, reached for the bell cord to summon beer, and muttered, "Pumpkin." When a woman walks out of our office looking like she just gave us a message from a blackmailer dressed as a scarecrow, I've learned not to expect Nero Wolfe to leap into action. For one thing, Wolfe doesn't leap. For another, he doesn't act, not in the sense most people mean. He deploys. I am usually the deployment. After Lydia Dane left, he didn't say a word for 30 seconds. That's longer than it sounds when you're in that office, and the only noise is city, air pushing against old brick and the settling creak of a house that's seen more tension than most police precincts. His eyes were closed, and his lips were doing that particular press they do when he's sampling an idea like a sauce. "It's not the pie," he said finally. "Thank you, chef. You want me to write that down, or can I trust my memory?" He ignored me, which was fair since I was interrupting genius at work. "She's either lying or she's telling the truth badly, which is almost as useful." "About which part?" "The part where a man pays her to hide a charm in a dessert as part of a proposal, and then vanishes. She told us that like it was a garnish, when in fact it is the plate. So that's where we start." "That," Wolfe said, "is where you start. Call her. Get the names. The vanished swain, the employees with access to her kitchen, anyone who stood to benefit from her humiliation, and ask her, was the charm unique? Describe it. Why didn't you ask her that yourself while she was here?" He gave me a look that translated cleanly to, "Don't be an ass, Archie." Because she was rattled. I wanted to see if she stabilized under my scrutiny. She didn't. "You will go to her, see the premises, smell the air." "You want me to smell for pumpkin. I want you to smell for fear." He tugged once on the bell cord. Fritz would be in shortly with the first beer of Wolfe's day, which meant I was dismissed in every way that mattered. "And Archie," "Yeah?" "Note every employee, especially those she does not mention unless pressed." Now, that right there is where people underestimate Nero Wolfe. They hear the vocabulary, see the girth, and figure the edge comes from brain cells he never wastes on motion. They forget the man studies human omission the way other men study race forms. I put a call into Lydia. She picked up on the second ring and sounded like she'd been standing next to the phone waiting for absolution. "I'm coming down," I told her. "You'll walk me through what happened. I'll need names, and I'll need to see that envelope they left you." There was a pause I didn't like. "I didn't mention that I still had it." "You didn't mention a lot of things. Lucky for both of us that I'm charming." "I shouldn't." She caught herself. "All right, I'll have it for you. Are you coming now?" "In 20. I hung up and gave Wolfe the update. He nodded once. "Return by 4. We dine at 7:30. I refuse to have you gallivanting about with squash perfume in your hair at mealtime." "Your faith moves me," I told him. What if I find out the boyfriend was kidnapped? Pfui, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. If he is kidnapped, the ransom note will arrive. If he is not, his absence is elective and the woman is being used. Which is the more interesting possibility? Go. So I went. It was one of those New York afternoons where the air has given up pretending to be warm, but hasn't committed to being cold, like it's holding its coat over one arm and saying it won't stay. The village was behaving like the village, which is to say, everyone on the sidewalk looked like they were on their way to inform someone that commerce is dead unless it's handmade. Dane's Seasonal Delights sat on a corner with two big windows, a blackboard sign out front, and a display that could make a Puritan forget his vows. The whole place glowed orange and gold, which I assumed was on purpose and not electrical fault. Lydia met me at the door and locked it behind me. It was early afternoon and she'd put a closed for prep sign out, which I liked, since it meant I was getting her without customers and without her putting on a show for them. Up close in her natural habitat, she looked different, less polished, more human. The jacket was gone, replaced by an apron dusted in flour and something darker, and her hair was clipped back in the kind of hurry that happens when you're keeping yourself from shaking. Her shoulders were tight, but her mouth had firmed up. Wolfe had been right. She hadn't stabilized, but she'd hardened. "Kitchen's this way," she said, and led me past the front counter, past a glass case of tarts and scones and objects that looked like food, but were probably legal seduction, into the narrow back hall and then through a swinging door. Now, I've been in kitchens. Fritz has spoiled me, but I know the standard layout. Lydia's kitchen was smaller than I expected for a place calling itself an institution. Stainless prep tables, industrial mixer the size of a small horse, cooling racks, spice shelf, walk-in. Clean, but not surgical, and it smelled like cinnamon, baked butter, and nerves. She pointed to a corner office, a glass-paneled nook just off the kitchen, big enough for a desk, a chair, and the kind of locked file cabinet that says, "I trust you, but not that much." "That's where whoever broke in left the envelope," she said. "I didn't touch anything except to take it out of the drawer and hide it again. I can get it for you." "First," I said, "let's do the people. Names, roles, grudges. Anyone who might have resented you, or this proposal pie situation, or the guy who ordered it. Then we'll get to the envelope." She swallowed. "All right." We did roll call. I took it down in my notebook, neat and fast, because Wolfe likes accuracy, and I like not repeating myself later. 1. Mateo Cruz. Early 20s, does fillings and prep. Brilliant palate, but moody lately. Her words. My translation. Talent plus attitude. 2. Daphne Rourke. Front counter, social media, customer charm. She thinks she should be my partner. Lydia didn't say it with bitterness. She said it like she was reciting the weather and waiting to see if I'd feel the rain. 3. Alan Breck. Night. Baker. Comes in at 10, leaves at 6 a.m. Keeps to himself, very reliable. Nothing like anyone described as keeps to himself to warm a detective's heart. 4. Marie Dane. Sister. Silent beat before the name, which I underlined. She handles ordering and books. She was here the night before the incident. I looked up. Older or younger? Younger by 2 years. How's the harmony in the choir? Lydia's mouth did a thing that was almost a smile and almost a flinch. We worked together. That told me plenty. Now, I said, the lucky romantic. The guy who ordered the ring in the pie stunt. It wasn't a ring, she said quickly. It was a charm, a small carved wooden pumpkin. Very detailed. He said it was an inside reference between them. He gave it to me to bake into the pie. Cash, no receipt, and I know how that sounds. But it wasn't sinister. It was sweet. Name. Evan Roth. Age. 30, maybe 32. Works in finance, or said he did. What did he look like? Tall, trim, dark hair, nice suit, anxious eyes. He was excited. He said she was going to say yes. She being? Another pause. Longer. He didn't tell me her name. I let that sit. And Evan Roth is currently missing. I tried to call him after I found the tampering. The number he gave me goes straight to a recorded message that says the line is disconnected. I went to the address he wrote on the order form. It's a condo, only the doorman says there's no Evan Roth in the building. So either you were lied to, I said, or Evan Roth recently decided not to exist. Her jaw clenched. Yes, I nodded toward the office. Envelope. She led me in. The office smelled different from the kitchen. Less sugar, more paper. On the desk, ledger books, a laptop, a little ceramic pumpkin with a crack on one side. Lydia crouched, unlocked the lower drawer of the file cabinet, and pulled out a manila envelope. No markings. She handed it to me like it might bite. I slid out the contents. There were exactly 2 items inside. 1. A thin triangular sliver of something orange and dense, sealed in a little plastic sleeve. Pumpkin custard, or what used to be before air had its way with it. 2. A printed photo, trimmed close at the edges. The photo was of Lydia. Not posed, not smiling, taken through the front window of the shop at night from across the street. She was counting cash at the register, head down, alone. The angle said distance, the grain said handheld. The message said, I'm close enough to watch you when you think you're alone. I felt the back of my neck go still. How many people have seen this? I asked. You, she whispered. And me. That's all? Yes. Not even your sister. For a second, she didn't answer. Then, no, not Marie. That was when I knew Wolfe would take it. Not for Lydia, not for the bakery, and definitely not for the sanctity of pumpkin. For this, a controlled threat delivered with finesse and carried into his sphere by a woman who hadn't realized yet that she was being arranged like garnish on someone else's plate. Wolfe hates manipulation in his house. I slid the photo back into the envelope and tucked the whole thing into my inside pocket. All right, I told her. Here's what happens next. You're going to keep operating like nothing's wrong. You're not going to tell anyone I was here except that I was here to talk about a seasonal corporate catering package, and you're not going to improvise beyond that. You're going to act normal with everyone, including Marie. Her eyes widened. You think it could be? I think a lot of things, I said, and most of them are rude. Let me keep them to myself for now. She nodded, fast. One more, I said. The pie that got sliced and swapped. Who had access, physically, between closing and opening? Her breath hitched. Alan. Only Alan. Alan Breck, night baker, keeps to himself. Yes. Does Alan know about the charm in the pie? No, she said quickly. Too quickly. No, of course not. Only I knew. Which, translated from panic to English, meant, yes, someone else knew. I left her there, standing in her glass office with her arms wrapped around herself and her jaw set like she planned to bite the next problem that walked through her door. On my way out, I paused at the counter and looked at the display case. I spotted what I figured had to be the famous pumpkin reverie pie. Deep orange, clean edges, dusting of spice on top like someone had stenciled a whisper. If you wanted to tuck a little carved charm into that, you could. If you wanted to take that charm out without leaving a mess, you'd need steady hands, privacy, and motive. Outside, I took a breath and got city air, which was less sweet but more honest. Then I headed for a cab uptown, running names through my head in a loop. Evan Roth, who maybe wasn't. Alan Breck, who kept to himself. Daphne Rourke, who wanted a promotion. Mateo Cruz, who was moody. And Marie Dane, who worked with her sister and hadn't seen the photo of her sister being watched at night. By the time I reached the brownstone, I had something else, too. Something that didn't match the rest. Lydia had told Wolfe she was afraid her reputation would crumble. She hadn't said she was afraid someone would hurt her. But whoever left that envelope wasn't playing with her reputation. They were playing with her nerves, and people don't do that unless they're planning on tightening the screws. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was 4:10. Wolfe's sense of time has more precision than an atomic clock when it involves meals, so I had 20 minutes of forgiveness before he'd start grumbling. Fritz let me in, nodded toward the office, and said quietly, "He is expecting you, Mr. Goodwin." That could mean anything from "he's ready for your report" to "he's been rehearsing your chastisement." Wolfe was in his chair, of course. The afternoon light cut across the room in amber stripes, glinting off the mahogany globe and the brass drawer pulls of his desk. He looked like a painting that disapproved of being looked at. The smell of beer and orchid fertilizer mingled faintly, his two acceptable forms of indulgence. "You are late," he said without glancing at his watch. "By 10 minutes, I said, hanging up my hat, which is exactly the amount of time it takes to digest an unpleasant discovery. "Indeed," he raised one brow. "You have one?" "Several." I sat, pulled out my notebook and flipped it open. "Our client's a better baker than she is a liar, but she's no innocent doe. Someone's playing her like a violin strung with pastry twine." He closed his eyes halfway, which for Wolfe is the equivalent of saying, "Continue before I die of impatience." "She's got 4 employees worth noting," I began. "Mateo Cruz, young and talented. Daphne Rourke, charming and ambitious. Alan Breck, quiet night worker. And Marie Dane, her sister and business partner of sorts. Each one's got a possible reason to mess with her, or with the mystery pie, depending on what that charm was worth." "Ah," Wolfe murmured. We returned to the charm. "Describe it." "Small wooden carving, shaped like a pumpkin, meant to go into a pie for a man named Evan Roth, who supposedly ordered it for a proposal. Cash payment, no record, no fiancé's name, no address that checks out. He's either a ghost or he wanted to vanish faster than a soufflé in a draft." Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "And the woman believes this man existed?" "She does. Or wants to." I pulled out the manila envelope and set it on his desk. "Then there's this. Found in her office drawer after a break-in. Contents, a sliver of pumpkin custard and a photo of Lydia herself, taken from across the street. At night. She hadn't told anyone, including her sister." That got him. He didn't move much, but his nostrils flared slightly, his version of a start. He used a handkerchief to lift the sleeve from the envelope and study it without touching the inside. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "The custard is meaningless. Symbolic at best, but the photograph. That is intrusion distilled." "Exactly my thought," I said. "Whoever took it wanted her nervous, and from the look of her, it worked." "Did you inquire about Alan Breck?" "Night baker, key holder, only one with access between closing and opening. She says he's reliable, but she said it like she was trying to convince herself. Also, when I asked if anyone else knew about the charm, she denied it so fast I could see the fear kick in mid-word." "Someone knew, Wolfe. Someone inside." He grunted. "Pooh. Of course someone knew. Secrets in a kitchen are as secure as chastity in a harem." Fritz entered quietly then, carrying the afternoon beer on a silver tray. Wolfe took the bottle and poured it into his glass with a deliberate hand. Watching him pour beer is like watching a priest perform a sacrament, if the priest were also judging your soul. "I infer," he said after the first sip, "that you wish me to continue this inquiry." "I wish you'd say you already decided to. I think it's more than a prank. Someone's playing psychological handball with our baker, and the ball's rolling toward us." "Hyperbole," Wolfe said, but he didn't dismiss it outright. He tapped his glass against the coaster. "The absence of this Evan Roth is intolerable. We will establish whether he exists. Call Saul Panzer." I blinked. "Already?" Now, he said, you will ask him to locate any Evan Roths fitting that age and description in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Westchester. If he finds more than 2, I shall despair of civilization. Saul gets the easy jobs, huh? Saul gets the precise jobs, Wolfe corrected. You, meanwhile, will return to Miss Dane's establishment tomorrow morning. Observe her staff. Introduce yourself under some pretext consistent with your earlier visit. And, Archie... He paused, and I waited. When Wolfe pauses mid-instruction, it's like hearing thunder stall above your roof. Bring me the spice blend she mentioned, the one whose scent accompanied the envelope. The pumpkin spice? Do not call it that, he said sharply. It is an abomination of nomenclature, but yes, I wished to smell it. If it was indeed distinctive, then whoever composed that envelope knew she would recognize it. That implies proximity, someone who knew her habits intimately. I made a note of it. You think the motive's personal? Always, when irrationality intrudes upon routine. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The man, if he existed, commissioned a pie to conceal an object of sentiment. That act was intimate, foolish, and potentially humiliating. Someone either resented him or her enough to corrupt the gesture. Or wanted to warn her. He opened one eye. You are conjecturing again. Yeah, but it's the only kind of guessing you let me do. He grunted. Do not romanticize this. There's a game here, yes, but it's small, a circle of people, each capable of deceit, none brilliant. It will unravel with patience. That's your department. Precisely. I could tell he was done, because he reached for the bell cord again, the polite way of saying, remove yourself from my presence. I stood. One more thing, I said. If this gets ugly, we're going to have visitors. Possibly uninvited ones. Then you will handle them, Wolfe said. But Archie, should any of them cross the threshold unbidden, you will inform them that my house is not a bakery. Got it. I'll keep the pies outside. He waved me off. Upstairs, the orchids would be waiting. Downstairs, dinner would be in the early stages of Fritz's choreography. Everything in Wolfe's universe was ordered, until it wasn't. That night, I called Saul and gave him the rundown. He didn't need encouragement. When you hand Saul a name, he hands you back a biography, a footprint, and occasionally the shoe. Then I spent an hour reviewing my notes. The list of suspects read like a recipe. One jealous sister, one moody genius, one ambitious charmer, and one invisible fiancé. The only thing missing was motive, or at least the kind that made sense. At 10, Wolfe called down from upstairs. He never yells, but somehow his voice carries through the house like it's built into the wiring. Archie. Yeah? Tomorrow, when you visit the bakery, observe the sister carefully. Her reactions will tell us whether this is a family quarrel masquerading as melodrama or something more deliberate. Anything else? Yes, he said. Do not eat anything there. I prefer my assistant unpoisoned. That was the extent of our good nights. When I turned out the lights in the office, the brownstone seemed unusually quiet. I've known that house a long time. Its silences come in flavors. This one tasted of something creeping closer, step by soft step. Something that had left a photograph on a baker's desk and a sliver of pie as calling card. And for once, I had the uneasy sense that whoever had started this game didn't care about the outcome. They just wanted the players nervous enough to slip. The next morning started too early for the kind of case that involved baked goods. Wolfe would have said the hour was an affront to human dignity, but then again, he was still in bed, so his dignity was safe. I, on the other hand, was headed downtown to smile at people with sugar on their aprons and secrets in their eyes. When I arrived at Dane's Seasonal Delights, the place was already open. The doorbell chimed over the hum of conversation, and the air smelled like caramelized guilt. Lydia was at the counter talking to a customer, her face composed into professional chair, but her eyes still carried the sleepless look of someone waiting for another envelope. She spotted me and excused herself, motioning me toward the back. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, keeping her voice low. "I didn't expect you so soon." "I like to see people before they've rehearsed their answers," I said, "and Wolfe wants that spice blend you mentioned, the one that smelled like the note." Her lips tightened. "I can get it, but please, be discreet. My staff doesn't know what you're here for." "That's the plan." She disappeared into the kitchen while I leaned against the counter and took stock of the morning crew. Mateo was working at a prep table, shaping dough with a precision that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. He was lean, dark-haired, with the kind of restless shoulders you see in men who want to be noticed but don't want to admit it. Daphne floated between customers, smiling like she'd patented the expression. Every laugh looked calibrated. She had ambition written all over her, in lipstick and posture. Then there was Marie, Lydia's sister. She stood near the register, counting the till, calm and detached. Same hair color, same sharp cheekbones, but the resemblance ended there. Lydia wore her nerves on the surface. Marie hid hers like state secrets. Lydia returned with a small glass jar. "Here," she said, passing it discreetly. "My autumn spice mix. You'll find it familiar." I pocketed it carefully. "I'll get it to Wolfe. Mind if I hang around for a bit, take in the scenery? Might help me understand the atmosphere." She hesitated. "All right, but please don't disrupt the flow. We have a morning rush." "I'll be as quiet as a church mouse, one that asks questions." She didn't smile, but she didn't stop me either. I started with Mateo. "Nice technique," I said, watching him roll out a pie crust. "You do all the baking yourself at night?" He didn't look up. "Mostly. Lydia does mornings. I finish what she starts." "That mean you're the last one here at night?" "Yeah. Sometimes Marie comes in late for the books, but she doesn't stay long." "She trusts you with the keys?" He gave a shrug. "She has to. I've been here 2 years." There was an edge in his voice, a mix of pride and resentment. "She treats you well?" I asked. He smirked. "She pays me. That's something." I let it drop there and drifted toward the counter where Daphne was arranging pastries. "You handle customers?" I asked. She gave me a glance that took my measure in under a second. "And marketing. Lydia's great with recipes, not so much with people." "You mean she's tough?" "She's particular," Daphne said diplomatically. "Which is fine. I just think the shop could grow if she trusted others more. She keeps everything close to the vest." "Even her sister?" That earned me a pause. Especially her sister. I filed that away. People love to complain sideways. Direct suspicion is too obvious. Resentment travels better in whispers. When the rush thinned, I caught Marie alone by the register. She greeted me politely, distant but not cold. "You're the gentleman Lydia met with yesterday?" "That's right, Archie Goodwin. I'm helping her with a private business issue." Her eyes flickered, gray and sharp. "Private business issue? That's a careful phrase." "I'm a careful man." "I see that." She closed the register and faced me fully. "My sister doesn't usually involve outsiders. Whatever's happening, I hope it's nothing compromising." "That depends," I said lightly, "on what you mean by compromising." She gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "In this business, reputation is everything. I'd hate to see hers damaged over something trivial." "Trivial like what?" "Like trusting the wrong person." It was subtle, but there was a weight behind it, a push. I could almost hear Wolfe's voice in my head. "Observe the smallest pressure. It reveals the greatest intent." Before I could ask more, Lydia appeared in the doorway, calling her sister into the kitchen. Marie left without another word, but her perfume lingered. a faint citrus that didn't match the bakery's warmth. I took that as my cue to leave. Lydia walked me to the door. "Did you find what you needed?" "Not yet," I said. "But I found a few people who make good suspects." She frowned. "Suspects. Occupational habit," I said. "I'll get this jar to Wolfe. He'll want to analyze it." Her hands tightened around her apron. "You really think this could be serious?" "I think someone's already made it serious. The photo wasn't a prank. Whoever took it wanted you off balance." Her face paled. "You think they'll come back?" I didn't answer directly. "Lock your doors tonight, and if you see anyone hanging around across the street, anyone, call me first, not the police." Her breath caught, but she nodded. "I will." Outside, the chill had settled into the city's bones. I caught a cab uptown, opened the window just enough to keep my head clear, and thought through what I'd seen. Marie's calmness was unnatural. Daphne's ambition was the open kind, Matteo's resentment, the simmering kind. Each could have tampered with the pie. But the envelope, the photograph, that was another matter. That had style, calculation. Someone who wanted to unravel Lydia, not just hurt her. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office dictating letters to the typewriter with the rhythm of a man offended by mediocrity. He stopped when I entered. "The spice?" he said. I handed over the jar. He unscrewed the lid and took a careful sniff. His nose wrinkled. Cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, ginger, mace, and something else. Yes, a faint trace of star anise. Curious. He closed it. "You have spoken to all 4 employees?" "Indirectly. They all play their parts well, but Marie, the sister, is the cool one. Too cool. And there's friction with Daphne. Lydia didn't mention that." "Of course not. People never mention what matters." He gestured for me to sit. "Archie, this is not about a pie, nor even the charm. It is about control. Someone is forcing this woman into reaction. The next move will come soon." "What makes you so sure?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping into that precise tone that always means he's already 3 moves ahead. "The game is designed to happen under observation. Whoever started it wanted an audience. And now?" He glanced toward the front door as if expecting it to open. "We are in the audience." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared moments later with a card on a tray. Wolfe took it, read the name, and handed it to me. The name written in neat, formal script was Evan Roth. For a man who didn't exist yesterday, he'd chosen an excellent time to appear. For a man who wasn't supposed to exist, Evan Roth had remarkable timing and better handwriting. I read the name twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things, then looked at Wolfe. His eyes had narrowed, which in his language meant his mind was sprinting while the rest of him stood still. "Show him in," he said quietly. Fritz reappeared a moment later, ushering in a man who could have stepped straight out of Lydia Dane's recollection, except cleaner and more deliberate. He was tall, neatly dressed in a grey suit that fit too well to be accidental, and his face carried the kind of polished strain that comes from years of learning how to look trustworthy. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice low, careful. "And you must be Mr. Goodwin." "That's right," I said, standing near the desk. "You've got the advantage. According to one of our clients, you disappeared." A faint smile. "That depends on who you ask." He took the chair Wolfe pointed to and sat with the poise of a man measuring the room as much as being measured. Wolfe didn't return the smile. "Mr. Roth, your reappearance is convenient. Miss Dane retained my services to determine whether you are a fiction, a fugitive, or a fool. Pray, which?" He flushed slightly, but kept his composure. "I assure you I'm none of those. I was out of reach, that's all. Circumstances." Wolfe made a sound that might have been a snort in a more emotional species. "Your circumstances involved commissioning a pie containing a wooden charm, then vanishing the day it was baked. Explain." Roth's hands tightened around each other. It wasn't meant to be mysterious. The charm was a gift. The pie was supposed to be delivered to someone else, a woman named Clara Wynne. I paid Miss Dane in cash because I didn't want Clara to trace it back to me before I was ready. Romantic subterfuge, Wolfe muttered. Tedious. Roth pressed on. I'd planned to propose that night. The charm was a small token from a story we shared. Our first date was at a harvest festival, but then Clara called that morning and cancelled dinner. She said she needed space. I was embarrassed, I suppose. I didn't collect the pie. I didn't think anyone would notice. Until yesterday when I saw Miss Dane's name in a small article about a vandalized bakery case. That made me straighten. You came because of that. He nodded. It mentioned a tempered pie, and I realized it had to be mine. I wanted to clear this up before she thought. I'd staged some kind of prank. I studied him. He wasn't lying badly, if he was lying at all. But his nerves had the careful quality of a man who'd practiced sincerity in the mirror. Wolfe steepled his fingers. You say you were embarrassed, yet you vanished completely. No contact, no explanation, no reachable number. That's rather extreme for mere disappointment. I changed my number, Roth said quickly, and left for a few days. I own a small consultancy. We had a project in Boston. I didn't think to tell Miss Dane I'd failed to need her pie. You assume, Wolfe said dryly, that your withdrawal caused no inconvenience, but someone took advantage of it. Miss Dane's pie was altered, the charm removed, her bakery violated, her peace destroyed. You may not have intended mischief, but you set it in motion. Roth looked genuinely startled. Altered? By who? That, Wolfe said, is what you have kindly interrupted me in determining. I decided to cut in. Mr. Roth, anyone outside you, Miss Dane, and her staff, know about the charm? He hesitated. I might have mentioned it to one person. Who? Clara, he said, when we were still together. I told her the pie was how I planned to propose. She thought it was ridiculous. Noted, Wolfe said, his tone sharpening. This woman, Miss Wynne, does she have reason to resent Miss Dane? None. They've never met. But resentment doesn't require acquaintance, only imagination. Wolfe took another sip of beer, considering him. You may go, Mr. Roth. Leave your address and number with Mr. Goodwin. Do not travel without informing me. If I require you, I dislike hunting. Roth blinked. You believe I'm in danger? I believe, Wolfe said calmly, that anyone associated with this confectionery absurdity is in danger of being manipulated. That includes you. Good day. Roth left with the expression of a man who had walked into a polite trap and wasn't sure how to get out again. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled through his nose, almost a sigh. Well? I asked. An honest fool, he said, but not harmless. He was followed. I turned. You're sure? I'm not omniscient, Archie, merely observant. His cuff bore a faint smudge of brown, dust from the masonry outside the house. He lingered in the vestibule long enough for someone to position themselves there earlier. Someone watched him enter. Could be a reporter, I said. Could be. But more likely, the watcher knew he would come here, which means the watcher knew of Miss Dane's contact with us. That sent a chill through the air thicker than Wolfe's usual disdain for human activity. You think someone's tailing her, or us? Both, perhaps. Whoever engineered this theater enjoys precision. They are not improvising, they are conducting. I rubbed my chin. That's comforting. He gave me a look that could have curdled butter. Archie, call Saul. Inform him our quarry has appeared and that he should look into a Miss Clara Wynne. I want every detail, occupation, address, acquaintances, and whether she prefers her revenge subtle or spectacular. I made the call while Wolfe sat immobile, eyes closed, absorbing the pattern like a chess master staring at an unfinished board. When I hung up, he spoke without opening his eyes. Miss Dane will be anxious to hear from you. Go to her this afternoon. Tell her Mr. Roth has materialized. Observe her reaction. Do not reveal more than necessary. If she feels relief, she is ignorant. If she feels fear, she knows." I nodded, grabbed my hat, and headed for the door. "You really think she's involved?" "I think," he said, "that innocence is rarely symmetrical. Someone in that kitchen knows far more than they should. We will soon see which one is overbaking their story." The cab ride downtown felt shorter than before, probably because my mind was busy juggling names. Lydia, Marie, Matteo, Daphne, Evan, Clara. 6 pieces, one missing hand guiding them. When I stepped out in front of the bakery, the usual smell of sugar hit me, but something else too. Smoke. Not much. Just a faint, acrid wisp curling from the alley behind the building. I followed it, rounding the corner just in time to see a trash can smoldering. Someone had dumped a handful of papers inside, still curling at the edges, the ink warping into illegible waves. I grabbed the lid, smothered the flame, and pulled a few half-burned pages free. They smelled faintly of nutmeg and fear. The first scrap bore part of a logo, Dane's Seasonal Delights. The second, a list of ingredient orders. The third, half a letterhead I recognized from our client's desk, her private stationery. Someone had been cleaning house. I straightened slowly, scanning the street. Empty. The only movement was the flicker of what looked like a camera lens glinting from the window across the way, then gone. Whoever was watching Lydia Dane wasn't done yet, and now, apparently, they were watching me too. I didn't make a habit of rummaging through burnt garbage, but when you find your client's stationery half-charred in an alley, you don't wait for permission. I folded the scraps carefully, stuffed them into my coat pocket, and glanced once more at the window where that glint had appeared. Nothing now. Just lace curtains and the kind of stillness that means someone's waiting for you to leave first. The alley was quiet, too quiet for a city that's supposed to hum. I walked back around to the front of the bakery, dusting ash from my sleeve, and found Lydia Dane standing inside the doorway. She looked paler than yesterday, her smile brittle. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you came back quickly." "I like punctuality," I said. "Is your trash always this interesting, or did someone take up arson as a hobby?" Her eyes widened, genuine surprise flashing across them before she looked toward the back hallway. "What do you mean?" "I mean there's a fire going behind your shop, or was. A small one, but it had your papers in it." She stepped forward, voice tight. "Papers? From my office?" "From your stationery, at least. Maybe old invoices, maybe something else. You might want to tell me who had access to that bin." Her throat moved as she swallowed. "Everyone uses it, but why would anyone—" She broke off, shaking her head. "It's probably just someone cleaning up. I told Marie to clear some old orders." "You told her today?" "Yes, early this morning." That could have been true, or it could have been the kind of thing you remember saying after the fact. Either way, I didn't like the timing. "Mind if I have a look inside your office again?" I asked. Her instinct was to refuse. I saw it in the hesitation, the small inhale. But she forced a nod. "Of course. Come." We passed through the kitchen, where Daphne and Matteo were at their stations. Daphne gave us a curious look, eyes darting from Lydia to me, and I smiled as if this was just another consultation about sugar ratios. Matteo didn't look up. He was muttering under his breath, kneading dough with too much muscle for comfort. The office door creaked as Lydia opened it. The air inside was cooler than before, faintly tinged with something chemical. The desk drawers were closed, the surface immaculate. Too immaculate. "Did you clean this recently?" I asked. She frowned. "No. Why?" "Because I've met filing systems messier than this in police evidence rooms. You had papers stacked here yesterday." Her gaze followed mine to the empty space. "I didn't touch them. Then someone did." That landed hard. Her voice dropped. Are you suggesting one of my staff? I'm suggesting that your shop isn't as private as you think. I bent and checked the cabinet. The lock was new, a different model from the one I'd seen before. I tapped it. When was this replaced? Last night, she said automatically, then blinked. Marie mentioned the key was sticking, so she changed it. I didn't think... You didn't think anyone had already been in there? She looked shaken now, eyes darting to the window. I've been careful, really. I locked everything when I left. Maybe too careful, I said quietly. Someone's watching your reactions as much as your shop. Whoever they are, they want you scared. Her fingers tightened on her apron. You think it's one of them? My staff. I think it's someone who knows when you're alone and when you're not, and someone who doesn't want us comparing notes. I pulled the burned scraps from my pocket and laid them on the desk. Recognize any of these? She leaned close. This was one of my old supplier orders. And this, that's from the binder I kept for special clients. Her voice cracked. The one I locked in that cabinet. Then your little fire wasn't random. It was erasing something. I folded the papers again. I'm taking these to Wolfe. He's better with ashes than I am. She nodded mutely, then looked up. Mr. Goodwin, you said someone was watching. Do you mean me or you? Maybe both, I said. But if they're watching me, they'll learn what bad manners get you. I left her standing in the doorway and went straight for a cab. Wolfe would be pacing mentally by now, though his feet wouldn't move an inch. When I got back to the brownstone, he was in the office, a fresh beer already half gone, his eyes closed in what passed for meditation. I dropped the charred pages on his desk. Somebody lit up the alley behind Dane's. They were burning these. He opened one eye, studied the ash-smeared edges, then reached for the magnifier. Pfui, he said softly. This is not merely destruction, it's curation. They burned selectively. Which means they wish to remove one thing while preserving another, perhaps a pattern, perhaps a gap. He glanced up. Did she see you find them? She did, and she didn't like it. Of course not. Wolfe leaned back. Saul has reported. That perked me up. Already. He is efficient. Miss Clara Wynne lives in an apartment on East 71st. Former gallery manager, recently unemployed. Terminated after a rather public argument with a business partner, a Miss Daphne Rourke. That landed like a sledgehammer. Daphne? The one working the counter? The same. Apparently they collaborated briefly on a pop-up culinary art project. Something involving edible sculpture. It ended poorly. There were accusations of theft, of ideas and funds. Miss Wynne withdrew. Miss Rourke reinvented herself as a baker's assistant. Well, that adds frosting to the cake, I said. If Daphne and Clara are connected, then the bakery isn't just her day job. It's her stage. Precisely, Wolfe said. And Miss Dane is the unwitting centerpiece. He lifted the spice jar again, uncapped it, and held it beneath his nose. Do you detect it, Archie? The faint sourness under the clove? That is burnt sugar mixed with oil. A synthetic binder often used in candle making or photography film adhesive. I frowned. So whoever left that envelope might have been in both businesses. Or using props from one to serve the other, he said. Miss Rourke, with her artistic inclinations, may have had reason to possess both. Could she also have the nerve to stalk her employer and burn her files? Ambition and spite are industrious companions, Wolfe murmured. But we must not yet discard Miss Marie Dane. Family resentment is a subtler poison. I paced a little. Then what's next? You will visit Miss Wynne, he said, with caution. If Miss Rourke is our arsonist, Miss Wynne may be her motive, or her victim. And if they're working together? He looked at me with mild irritation, as if I'd suggested the sun rise at an improper angle. Then, Archie, you will observe. You will not confront. You will return. I will decide how to proceed. Understood. As I turned toward the door, he added, And Archie, be aware that whoever observes Miss Dane may also be aware of you now. You have been seen. That wasn't something I needed reminding of. The back of my neck had already told me. Outside, dusk was sinking over Manhattan like a slow bruise. I flagged a cab toward East 71st, wondering which woman would open the door first, Clara Wynne, the discarded lover, or the next player in a game that had just started to smoke. The cab dropped me at East 71st, a quiet stretch where the buildings wore good breeding and old money like perfume. Clara Wynne's address was a sandstone walk-up with a stoop clean enough to eat off. The directory listed her on the 3rd floor. No roommates. I buzzed and waited. Nothing. I buzzed again and got a crackle of intercom static before a woman's voice came through. Soft, deliberate, the kind that makes you lean closer to catch every word. Yes? Archie Goodwin. I'm looking for Miss Clara Wynne. I have a few questions about a mutual acquaintance. Evan Roth. Silence, then a faint, skeptical laugh. That's a name I haven't heard in weeks. What do you want? Just to clarify a few things. I'm not police. Private inquiry. Another pause. Come up. 3rd floor. Right-hand door. The door buzzed. I climbed, taking my time. The hallway smelled faintly of jasmine and old books. When she opened the door, I understood why Evan Roth had probably thought proposing with a pie was a good idea. Clara Wynne was the kind of woman who looked like she'd make you believe in impossible gestures. Tall, auburn hair swept back, grey eyes that missed nothing. She wore a silk robe that managed to look unstudied but wasn't. Private inquiry, she said, stepping aside. That sounds dignified. Come in. Her apartment was all soft light and precision. No clutter, no stray objects, just a chessboard on a low table and an unfinished canvas on an easel. I didn't need Wolfe's eye to see control when it filled a room. She gestured to the couch. You mentioned Evan. What's he done now? Technically, what hasn't he done? He dropped out of sight right after commissioning a pie with a little wooden pumpkin baked into it. That earned me a slow, surprised blink, then a faint smile. The man always did have a taste for symbolism. I suppose it was a proposal. Supposed to be. Miss Dane, the baker, was hired to make it, except someone tampered with it, took the charm out, and left her a note that looked more like a threat than a prank. Miss Dane, Clara repeated, tasting the name like she was testing for poison. I've seen her shop. Evan mentioned it once. Mentioned or obsessed? She tilted her head. That depends on your definition. He liked her work. He said her pies had integrity. She gave a small, derisive laugh. It seems he preferred pastry to honesty. Meaning? Meaning he lied. About money, about business, about me. You can tell you're Mr. Roth I'm not impressed he's resurfaced. So you know he's back in town. Her eyes sharpened. Back? He never left as far as I knew. That stopped me for half a beat. He told us he was in Boston. She smiled faintly. Of course he did. Evan collects convenient locations like other men collect cufflinks. Then where has he been? I could guess, she said, walking to the window. But I'd rather not. What I do know is that he borrowed money from me for an art project with a certain Daphne Rourke. The name landed exactly where Wolfe would have wanted it. And that went badly. Oh, spectacularly. Daphne wanted to merge culinary art with photography. She used my contacts, my studio, my funds, and then she vanished, reappearing months later working in a bakery. I hear she's thriving. Tell me, is that where you come in? You could say that, I said. I'm tracing what's left of a trail. You and Daphne had a falling out. Did Evan play a part? Her smile flattened. He played both sides. Helped her with design concepts, then told me she was unstable. I ended it, he apologized. Then he disappeared. A man like that leaves a wake whether he means to or not. Did he tell you about the pie? I told him it was idiotic. I didn't know he'd actually ordered it. I watched her carefully. Her voice hadn't wavered once, but something about her hands gave her away. One clenched lightly on the edge of the table, nails leaving faint marks. "Miss Wynne," I said, "someone's watching Lydia Dane, photographing her, breaking into her shop, burning her records. If there's history between you, Daphne, and Evan, this could be more than a love triangle. It's starting to look like a geometry problem." She turned sharply. "You think I'm involved? I think someone's trying to draw all of you into the same picture, whether you like it or not." Her gaze held mine, cool and sharp. "If you're implying I'd waste time tormenting a baker because of a man I've already forgotten, you're mistaken. But—" She hesitated, then went to her desk and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "This came in the mail 3 days ago." She handed it to me. It was a photograph, grainy, black and white. A storefront, Dane's Seasonal Delights, taken at night. "Recognize it?" she asked. "Too well." "Where did this come from?" "No return address, just the image. But look closely." I did. Near the lower corner, half in shadow, stood a figure, female, blurred, hair tied back. "Daphne," Clara said quietly. "I'm sure of it." I looked again. Could have been her. Could have been anyone. But Wolfe always says a photograph's real power isn't in what it shows. It's in what it suggests. "Why keep this?" I asked. I thought it was an apology at first, or a warning. I wasn't sure which. She turned away, arms crossing. "If someone's watching that bakery, they want all of us nervous. Evan, Daphne, me, Lydia. Maybe Marie, too. It feels choreographed." That word made something click in my head. Wolfe's voice again. "They are conducting. Miss Wynne, one last question. You said you lent Daphne money. How much?" "5,000. Did you ever get it back?" Her smile was slow and dangerous. "No. But if you find her, you can tell her she owes me interest and an apology." I pocketed the photo. "I'll pass it along. Don't go anywhere without locking your door, and if you get another one of these, call me directly." Her brows lifted. "You think this will end soon?" Nothing ends soon when Wolfe's interested. It ends when he decides it should. She gave me a look that could have been amusement or pity. "Then I wish you luck, Mr. Goodwin." Outside, dusk had melted into full night. I walked 2 blocks before I stopped at a phone booth and called the brownstone. Wolfe answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick from beer and contemplation. "Report," he said. "Miss Wynne's not our vandal, but she's in the web. She got a photo of the bakery. Same nighttime shot as the one Lydia had of herself. Except this one's wider and Daphne's in the corner." Wolfe exhaled softly, the kind of sound that means the pattern's crystallizing. "Bring it to me. And Archie, be careful returning. If these photographs circulate in pairs, the next may feature you." "Then I hope they get my good side," I said, and hung up. By the time I reached the brownstone, I'd checked my tail twice. No one obvious, but I still felt the prickling at the back of my neck, the sense of eyes where there shouldn't be any. Inside, Wolfe was waiting. He took the photograph, studied it with his loupe, and said quietly, "So, the conductor reveals another note. The tempo increases." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning, my dear Archie," he said, "that our adversary has begun to play directly to the audience. We will oblige them with a performance of our own." And that's how I knew we'd crossed the line from investigation to confrontation. When Nero Wolfe starts talking about performances, it means the curtain's about to rise, and someone's going to wish they hadn't bought a ticket. When Wolfe says a performance, it doesn't mean applause or spotlights. It means war, executed from a chair. His performances take place in that office, under the steady glow of the desk lamp, with me as stagehand and messenger. The man never leaves his theatre, but everyone else ends up on his stage sooner or later. He spent half an hour studying Clara Wynn's photograph with that calm intensity that makes the air heavier. I stood by the globe, waiting while he muttered to himself, identifying shadows like they were suspects. Finally, he placed the photo on the desk, fingers tapping the edge. "Archie," he said, "the same photographer took both this and the one of Miss Dane. How do you figure? The composition, the angle, the same oblique elevation, rooftop or high window, the same grain from a cheap lens, but consistent exposure. The hand is practiced but deliberate. Someone is documenting, not improvising. So our watcher's an artist with too much time on their hands." "Not merely an artist," he said, "an observer with a thesis. We are not dealing with impulse." He fell silent again. That was my cue to make myself useful, or at least audible. "So what's our move? You said performance, which usually means curtain call. Who's our audience?" He closed his eyes. "All of them. Miss Dane, her sister, Miss Rourke, Mr. Roth, Miss Wynne. Each in conflict, each suspicious of the others, and all being watched. The watcher must believe they control the narrative. So we shall invite them here, to play their parts. You're calling everyone in. Tomorrow at 8, inform them discreetly. Tell each that I have conclusive information identifying the party responsible for the tampering and subsequent intimidation. That will guarantee attendance." "That's a stretch," I said. "You don't have conclusive anything." He opened one eye. "Of course not, but I shall have it by tomorrow." I sighed. "Right, and I'll spend the morning collecting the cast." He didn't respond, which meant I was dismissed. The next day started grey and stayed that way. I called Lydia first. She sounded half relieved, half afraid. Marie was colder, said she'd come if it's necessary. Daphne asked who else would be there. Her tone was light, but there was strain under it. Evan Roth was hesitant until I mentioned Wolfe's name. Then he agreed quickly. Clara Wynne, when I called last, didn't even ask what for. 8 o'clock, she said. I'll be there. By evening, the brownstone smelled of Fritz's preparations, something rich with onions and cognac, the kind of meal that can make Wolfe patient with humanity. He sat in his chair in his dark suit, massive and still, his eyes heavy-lidded but bright. "They'll come," I said. "Of course they will," he murmured. Guilt, fear, curiosity, one of those lures works for everyone. By 8 sharp, they began to arrive. Lydia first, visibly nervous but dressed for formality, followed by Marie, brisk and tight-lipped. Evan came next, looking like a man, who'd dressed twice before deciding which version of himself to wear. Daphne swept in at 8:05 in black silk, too composed to be calm. Clara Wynne arrived last, at 8:10, cool and precise. When the last of them sat, Wolfe's gaze swept the room. "I've asked you all here because each of you has been implicated, either directly or circumstantially, in a series of events centered upon Miss Dane's bakery. A tampered pie, a missing charm, a burned record, photographs taken without consent. The pattern, as always, is simple once one stops being human." Lydia's voice trembled. "Do you know who did it?" "Indeed," Wolfe said, "but you will forgive me if I do not begin with the answer. Truth, like wine, benefits from aeration." He leaned back slightly. "Mr. Roth, you created the first domino. You commissioned a sentimental confection, payment in cash, anonymity ensured, then absented yourself. You told us you were in Boston. You were not." Roth stiffened. Silence, please. You were in the company of Miss Rourke." That one landed like a thunderclap. Daphne's head snapped up. "That's not—" "It is," Wolfe said flatly. "You assisted her in her so-called art project, one that borrowed Miss Wynne's money, Miss Dane's concept, and your emotional instability. When the project collapsed, you all retreated to your corners, each blaming the others, but Miss Rourke. You lacked funds. You needed revenge and visibility. So you staged a performance, a small terror, perfectly tailored. Daphne's color drained. You think I broke into the shop? That's absurd. Not broke in, Wolfe corrected. You had access. Miss Dane trusted you. You knew the schedule, the keys, the inventory. You also knew about the charm because Mr. Roth told you. You removed it to destroy the meaning of the gesture. But you did not stop there. You photographed Miss Dane afterward, knowing she would come to me. You wanted the story told. She stared at him, breathing shallowly. You can't prove that. I already have, Wolfe said. The photograph's perspective was from the roof opposite the bakery. That building houses a short-term studio lease. Under your name, Miss Rourke. And the distinctive scent in the envelope, the mixture of clove and synthetic resin, is identical to the medium used in your art adhesive. You are a woman of talent and grievance, but not of restraint. Daphne's hand rose to her mouth, then dropped. I didn't mean to hurt her, she whispered. She had everything. The shop, the attention. She took what I built and made it safe. I wanted her to see what fear felt like. Lydia gasped. You watched me. Daphne's eyes were wet now, defiance flickering through shame. I wanted you to understand. You used my designs. You told everyone they were yours. That will do, Wolfe said sharply. You have confessed enough to ensure complications. But Miss Dane, you are not blameless either. Lydia blinked. Me? You concealed your sister's financial strain, Wolfe said. Miss Marie Dane has been funneling money from the bakery accounts for months to cover debts, a fact you discovered recently, though you chose silence to preserve family peace. Marie rose halfway from her chair. That's a lie. It is arithmetic, Wolfe replied. I received a copy of your supplier invoices, reconstructed from the fragments Mr. Goodwin rescued from the alley. You doctored them to withdraw cash. The night Miss Rourke staged her photographs. You were there late, attempting to destroy the evidence. Marie's voice cracked. I didn't know she was there. I saw the fire. I panicked. I imagine you did. Wolfe's tone softened fractionally. And so you burned more than records. You burned your credibility. The room was silent except for the ticking clock. Wolfe glanced at me, then back at the group. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this was never a story about love or art. It was about envy. Miss Rourke envied Miss Dane's success. Miss Dane envied her sister's ease. Miss Wynne envied Miss Rourke's audacity. Mr. Roth, his lip curled slightly, envied the devotion of all three. Envy is the quietest poison, but the most contagious. He folded his hands. Miss Rourke, you will make full restitution for the damages and submit the negatives of your photographs. Miss Dane, you will decide whether to forgive your sister or deliver her to the authorities. Mr. Roth, remove yourself from their orbit before I decide to prune the species. And Miss Wynne, your curiosity ends here. No one moved for a moment. Then Daphne broke down first, shaking, while Marie sank back into her chair like the air had been pulled out of her. Lydia sat very still, tears balanced but not falling. I looked at Wolfe. You sure you're not part surgeon? Because that was an operation. He gave me a look somewhere between irritation and exhaustion. Bah, the dissection of folly is not surgery, it is hygiene. When the last of them had gone, the house returned to silence. Fritz's footsteps retreated toward the kitchen. Wolfe sat back, eyes closed, and muttered, Pumpkin of all things. Humanity never ceases to debase the noble. I grinned, reaching for my notebook. So ends another festival of fools. He opened one eye. No, Archie. It ends only when people stop confusing creation with possession. Then it'll never end, I said. He grunted, reached for his beer, and the brownstone settled into peace again, the kind of peace that comes only after chaos has been catalogued and priced. Dinner was ready. The case was done. And somewhere downtown, the smell of burnt sugar still lingered. Fading, but not gone. Wolfe didn't move for a full 5 minutes after the door closed behind the last of them. He sat with his eyes half shut, breathing through his nose in that slow, deliberate rhythm that usually means he's dissecting something invisible. I stayed quiet, because when Wolfe's thinking, words are as welcome as a marching band in a library. Finally, he opened one eye. "Archie." "Still here," I said. "Observe that the conclusion of a case is not necessarily its end." "That sounds like a warning." "It is," he said. "The confession we obtained was sufficient for our purposes, but insufficient for my peace." "Because you think Daphne was lying?" "Partially," he said, "but more because she was telling the truth. Her performance was too complete. She admitted envy, she accepted blame, she wept precisely when appropriate. Such alignment between guilt and confession is unnatural." I leaned against the desk. "So you're saying she's not our puppeteer after all?" He grimaced. "I'm saying the strings may extend beyond her reach." That didn't improve my mood. "You want me to tail her?" "No, Saul will." He reached for the phone, dialed, and issued 3 sentences that amounted to a small commandment. When he hung up, he said, "You will attend to Miss Dane. Make certain she does not collapse under the aftermath. Fear and relief in rapid succession can unbalance an already fragile mind." I nodded. "Anything else?" "Yes. Watch for anyone attempting to, how do you Americans put it, tie up loose ends." That phrase stuck with me. Wolfe doesn't deal in melodrama. So when he starts sounding like a screenwriter, it means the ground's moving under us. The next morning, I went downtown. Dane's Seasonal Delights was closed, blinds drawn. I knocked anyway, and after a few seconds, Lydia opened the door. She looked hollow-eyed but steady. The kind of calm that comes after a storm you've convinced yourself is over. "I was expecting someone from the press," she said. "Disappointing, I know. You'll have to settle for me." She let me in. The kitchen smelled faintly of disinfectant instead of sugar, and the counter where Daphne used to work was spotless. No bowls, no utensils, nothing. "I sent everyone home," Lydia said. "I needed a day to clean, to start over." "Understandable," I said. "Though you might want to keep Marie close. 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1. Her expression tightened. "Marie's gone. She packed last night and left. Didn't even tell me where." That wasn't good. "Did she take anything besides her dignity?" Lydia shook her head. "Just her things. She said she needed time away." "She left before or after Wolfe made his little speech?" "After." She looked at me. "You don't think—" "I don't think," I said, "until Wolfe tells me to, but her timing's bad." She exhaled and leaned against the counter. "I didn't want to believe any of it. About Daphne, about Marie. But it fits, doesn't it? Daphne wanted attention, Marie needed money, and I—" She broke off, looking at her hands. I was too proud to notice. "Pride's a luxury item," I said. "You can afford it again once you're safe." She gave a small, uncertain smile. "You sound like Mr. Wolfe." "I'll try to live that down," I said. "Speaking of which, did you tell anyone you were coming here today? Anyone outside the circle?" "No. Why?" "Just checking." I stayed for another half hour, made sure the locks were working, and promised to drop by later in the week. When I left, the street felt too still. I walked half a block before I saw a car that didn't fit. A dark grey sedan parked opposite the bakery, empty except for a crushed cigarette on the curb beside the driver's door. The kind of car you don't notice until you're supposed to. I memorized the plate and caught a cab. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was finishing lunch, which for him means an hour of chewing punctuated by insults toward the world at large. When Fritz cleared the dishes, I gave my report. She's rattled but functional. Marie's gone. Probably took off last night. Indeed, he said, sounding neither surprised nor pleased. And you were followed. That stopped me. You knew? Not knew, predicted. The sedan outside the bakery has been registered to a temporary leasing agency. Saul traced it an hour ago. The lessee's name was Miss Marie Dane. Well, I said slowly, either she's sentimental or she's making the rounds before leaving town. Neither, Wolfe said. She's waiting. For what? For confirmation that she is safe. He took a long sip of beer, then added, Miss Dane may not have orchestrated the entire affair, but she has now inherited its consequences. I believe she fears someone still intends to recover the missing charm. The charm? I said. The little wooden pumpkin? I thought that was just a gimmick. Phooey, he said. It was a gimmick, yes, but of value. Mr. Roth did not mention the detail I suspected. The carving was a hollow. Inside it was a microchip containing proprietary data from his consultancy. I blinked. And you just dropped that in like it's the weather report. He shrugged. An event rare enough to note. Saul learned it this morning. The data pertained to financial analytics, apparently stolen from a former partner. Mr. Roth commissioned the pie as an absurd means of smuggling it back into his possession. I sat down. So the proposal story was a pretext, Wolfe said, which means Miss Rourke's tampering was coincidental only in timing. She thought she was sabotaging romance when in fact she was stealing a prototype worth a small fortune. The real question is whether she understood what she'd taken. And if Marie knew. She knew enough to burn the records, Wolfe said. And now, having realized what that charm represents, she will attempt to trade it. Trade it with who? He looked at me, expression dry. Whoever believes they own it, Mr. Roth, perhaps, or his former business partner. Both are now potential murderers, if they are not already. I whistled. And where does that leave us? It leaves us, Wolfe said, on the brink of another intrusion. Miss Marie Dane will contact either her sister or you within 24 hours. When she does, you will arrange a meeting and ensure she is brought here. Alive. Sounds easy. Nothing of worth ever is. That night I sat in the office with a cup of coffee and the city's noise leaking faintly through the window. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, communing in Latin. The phone rang just after 10. Goodwin, I said. The voice on the other end was whisper thin. Mr. Goodwin, it's Marie. She sounded winded, frightened. I thought you'd skip town. I tried, but they're following me. Who's they? I can't say over the phone. I have the charm. I didn't know what it was, not until I opened it. Please, you have to meet me. Tonight. Where? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was trembling. Central Park. By the fountain near 72nd. Half an hour. The line went dead. I hung up slowly, turned toward the stairs, and called up to Wolfe. She's got the charm, I said, and trouble's right behind it. From above came his measured reply, heavy as stone. Then go, Archie, but do not, under any circumstances, let her deliver herself to the wrong hands. I grabbed my coat, gun, and hat, and stepped out into the night. The park waited. Black water, empty benches, and a promise of answers that rarely end politely. The city had that late-night hush it gets when the wind pauses between traffic lights. Central Park after dark isn't my favorite venue for negotiations. Too much open space for bullets and too little for witnesses. But when a frightened woman with a stolen microchip calls for help, you don't send regrets. You go. I got there 5 minutes early and parked on the east side, keeping my eyes open. The fountain near 72nd shimmered under the lamplight, a lazy stream cutting through the stillness. A woman stood near it, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather. Marie Dane. She looked smaller, older, like fear had already been chewing at her for days. Marie, I said, keeping my voice even. "You made good time." She turned fast, eyes darting past me toward the path. I didn't know who else to call. They were outside my hotel. I think one followed me here. "Then we should keep moving," I said. "Where's the charm?" She reached into her purse, fumbling. "I have it. I didn't mean to steal it. I thought it was just—" A sound cracked through the air, a soft pop, like a champagne cork that had lost its reason to celebrate. Marie gasped and stumbled forward. I caught her as she sagged. The purse hit the ground, scattering papers and lipstick. Blood darkened her collar. I dropped to one knee, scanning the shadows. The shot had come from the trees across the path, but the shooter was already gone. I pressed my hand against the wound, but her breathing was thin and fast. "Marie," I said quietly, "look at me. Who was it?" Her lips moved. "Not Daphne." Then she was still. I stayed there long enough to be sure, then pulled my hand away and picked up the purse. The charm had rolled free, a tiny wooden pumpkin, slick with rain. I slipped it into my pocket, called homicide, and then called Wolfe. He didn't sound surprised. "You have it?" "I do. Marie's dead." A short silence. "Bring it here. Quickly." By the time I got back, the brownstone was awake. Wolfe was at his desk in his robe, eyes sharp despite the hour. Fritz hovered in the doorway, pale and tense. I set the charm on the desk. Wolfe took it delicately, examining the small seam that ran along one side. With a thin knife, he pried it open, revealing a silver chip smaller than a thumbnail. "So that's what everyone's been baking and burning over," I said. "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Mr. Roth's true proposal, industrial espionage disguised as romance. He intended to retrieve this and sell it quietly, but someone else saw its value." "Marie?" "No, Marie only found it. The thief was the one who fired tonight." He looked up. "And I believe he will come to retrieve it shortly." "That's optimistic." "It's inevitable. He has no choice. He will learn that Miss Dane is dead, deduce that you brought the object here, and understand that this house is now his last obstacle." "Nice of him to come to us," I said. "Precisely. Lock the door, Archie." It didn't take long. 20 minutes later, the bell rang. Wolfe didn't move. "Answer it." I opened the door, keeping my hand near my gun. Evan Roth stood there. His coat was damp, his face calm, too calm. "Goodwin," he said softly. "May I come in?" "Sure," I said, "if you're here for coffee and confession." He smiled faintly. Something like that. When he stepped into the office and saw Wolfe, his composure cracked just enough to confirm what we already knew. Wolfe spoke first. "You are efficient, Mr. Roth. I had not expected you until morning." Roth's eyes flicked to the desk, to the tiny wooden charm sitting open like a wound. "You know, then?" "I know that you are an embezzler and a murderer," Wolfe said. "You hired Miss Dane to conceal your theft. When your co-conspirator, Miss Rourke, tampered with the pie, you panicked. You feared the data lost or exposed. You arranged to have her and Miss Wynne discredited. And when you realized Miss Marie Dane possessed the chip, you followed her to silence the last witness." "That's nonsense," Roth said, though the sweat on his temples disagreed. "She was running. I tried to stop her." "Spare us," Wolfe interrupted. "Your hands are unsteady, Mr. Roth. You may as well sit." Roth's gaze darted toward me, then the door. I didn't move. He sighed, sank into the nearest chair. "So what now? You call the police? They'll never understand what this is worth." "Value," Wolfe said, "is no defense against vulgarity." He reached for the phone, dialed Inspector Kramer's number, and spoke in calm, clipped tones. "Yes, Kramer, he is here. You'll want to bring a warrant and a medical team. The charge will be murder. Marie Dane." "No, she will not testify." Roth sat very still as Wolfe hung up. "You think you've won?" he said quietly. I think, Wolfe replied, that civilization occasionally wins by removing its lesser members. The silence stretched until the sirens began to echo faintly from the street. Roth slumped, staring at the floor. I stayed by the door until Kramer and his men arrived, took him without protest, and left again. When the house was quiet, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. A sordid business, he said. Greed disguised as sentiment, ambition disguised as art. Humanity insists on hiding its filth under flavor. Poetic, I said, but the cleanup's still mine. You want me to tell Lydia? Yes. Tell her sister died preserving her integrity. It will help her sleep. That's not exactly true. It is close enough for comfort. I nodded. And what about Daphne? She will survive. Guilt is a tenacious companion. I started for the door, then paused. Wolfe, how'd you know Roth was our man? He opened his eyes, that faint gleam of pride slipping through. The pie, Archie. Always the pie. He paid for discretion, but he wanted the delivery himself. No true lover sends a ring by proxy. Only a thief does. Everything else was noise. I grinned. You and your culinary logic. Reason, he said, is the only seasoning worth applying. When I left the brownstone, dawn was creeping over the city, gray and cold. The streets were quiet again. I thought about Marie, about Lydia, about all the little lies people bake into their lives and call them sweet. Somewhere behind me, Wolfe was probably settling in for breakfast, already forgetting the world's ugliness in Fritz's eggs and Montenegrin coffee. That was his privilege. Mine was to keep walking, watching, and writing it all down. As I reached the corner, I looked back once at the brownstone. The windows glowed faintly, steady and safe. Inside that fortress of thought, Nero Wolfe would already be dissecting the next absurdity of human nature. And me? I'd be there when the bell rang again, notebook ready, waiting for the next knock on the door that promised trouble disguised as civility. Because that's life. With Wolfe, no endings, just quiet after the storm and the smell of orchids in the air.